Do you want to know how to sell a property across the country in 48 hours with no realtor? Stay tuned. Well, welcome back, everybody, to NoteSchool TV. We are back once again, like we are every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time. We are live as an opportunity to just engage with you guys, to bring the best content across the web that we possibly can. If you are new and this content is valuable to you, please like these videos. It means a lot to us. And if it's something that is valuable to your business, make sure you're subscribing to the channel to make sure you're getting the up-to-date content that we're publishing. And especially if you really want the most up-to-date, make sure you click that bell notification to notify you when we go live, so that you can jump on to the question box, to the chat box on your social channels and engage with us. Say hi, bring your questions, get engaged a little bit. If you're brand new to NoteSchool TV and you're trying to figure out kind of what's going on, what is a note, what is this all about, you can check out noteschool.com/TV to learn a little bit more and kind of figure out what that next step is. You can even figure out what a note is and kind of how you can get engaged with us a little bit further. We are going to be here every single Wednesday, and we've got a great lineup for you today. But before we get too far down the road, I want to kick some things off with some market updates and the news.
How are you?
I'm good, ladies and gentlemen. We've got Mr. Joe Varnador, who's going to bring us some great intel. What do you got for us today, Joe?
Oh, well, we have got some interesting stuff in the news this week, Brian, and I am having a spot of technical difficulty here, so I am working here in the background on that. So let's see here. All right. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that, guys.
This is the beauty of live, isn't it, Joe?
Live TV.
That's right.
I'll tell you what, Brian. I'm gonna go without the presentation, and I'm just gonna kind of talk through this. So, and it just kind of dropped off and couldn't get it back. So, here's the news of the week: bidding wars, price gains expected to continue in frenzied U.S. real estate market. So, Brian, we've talked about this over the last, the last couple of months, right? How crazy the real estate market is. And according to Redfin, right, and this came out just a few days ago, it says during the same week in January, which was last week, the number of homes for sale plummeted 36%. 36% from the same period last year. And the rate of new homes that were hitting the market dropped by 13%.
Wow.
Now, Brian, that's huge, right? The shortage is expected to continue into the next, at least to the first half of this year. And Ms. Fairweather that wrote this says that I expect bidding wars, fast sales, and double-digit price growth to continue, she says. So let's talk about some other numbers here, right?
Okay.
So the pandemic-driven seller's market, right? And it is a seller's market, right? Intensified and is expected to last through the first half of the year. Bidding, speedy sales. The main thing that's going on is scarcity, Brian. So when there's not enough of something, what happens? Everybody wants in on the game, right? So in the week ending January 24th, sales jumped 18% from the same time last year. Pending sales surged 28%. And price gains jumped 18% over that same period of time. So my big question to everybody is the market too high? And could people be paying a little bit too much right now?
Well, I think it depends on the market, but what's really fascinating is a lot of the news that we've been talking about in our NoteSchool TV and some of the content we've published is that's the surface level view. But to kind of dig into, there's a whole world that's happening underneath these bidding wars and stuff like that in the mortgage industry that I think is going to create a huge opportunity for people who are to know. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, more to come on that. I mean, as we kind of move forward and with everything that we do here, yeah, it's going to be crazy. So let's see here. We're going to get well, Brian, kind of bring us in here, and I'm trying to pick up my PowerPoint here. Sorry again, guys.
No, that's not a problem. While you're pulling that up, let's go ahead and bring on Mr. Eddie Speed himself and kind of get his take on really what's happening in the market right now. Before we even get to our guest, I want to bring on Eddie to just share with us a little bit when market sales are going like this, and it seems like everything's great. Now's the time. What's kind of happening in the marketplace, and what does that mean for investors today?
Well, I mean, the shortage clearly has caused a gain in value, supply and demand. And so there's no question about that. The question is this weird market condition, because if you listen to the state of the market or whatever, the conditions of the market, when I talk about those variables, I said, less than 2 weeks ago, there were 17 million properties that either didn't make a rent payment or a mortgage payment, one or the other. 17 million properties. And people go, well, how can that be when real estate is escalating in value? And so we're just in a weird time. I believe that we are helping people guide through the path of how to go do this. We don't want to go sit on the sidelines forever. We want to make sure we're making informed decisions. The guy that we have on today is a perfect guest. The reason he's a perfect guest is pretty simple. He showed how to sell a property without a realtor way away from where he lives. He got a buyer within 2 days, within 48 hours. Brian, that was an amazing headline, by the way, dude.
Yeah. Man, that's really fantastic. And I think now's the perfect time to kind of bring in our guest. I'll turn it over to you and Joe, and you could talk to our good friend Larry to kind of show people something pretty incredible.
It's awesome.
And we have the show up now. So
Joe, I'm going to call off the whole thing, pal.
Man, I tell you, I'm sweating bullets here, guys. So how are you, Larry?
I'm doing great. I could have done it without a PowerPoint. I don't believe in death by PowerPoint, so no worries on that.
Well, we hold ourselves to a very high standard here. So, Larry, you and Eddie and I was thinking about this earlier. We have something, we have several things in common, but one thing that we have in common is that we both were able to marry ladies that were a lot smarter than we are, right? And we had your bride on about 3 weeks ago, and she talked about another deal that you guys did in Seattle. But this is a whole different. This is a completely different deal. It's a little different property class. We were talking about a $400,000 house, and now we're talking about a $40,000 house, right?
Right.
One thing this house in Morenci, Michigan.
Morenci, Michigan.
Morenci.
Yeah, that's in Morenci, Michigan. And it's just a little house that we picked up the note a few years back and got it for what we thought was a great price and great return on it and so forth. And this is the house I've never seen, never been in. It's just a nice little house across from school and it's desirable neighborhood. And like I say,
you guys originally bought this in sometime in mid to late 2018, and you bought it just as a performing note, and you were going to receive the monthly payments on it, and then something happened with your borrower, and they had some challenges, right?
Right. Well, and that's the thing. It's like we always think about what's our strategy, worst case scenario. If the note goes bad, what are we going to do? And in that way, we can sleep at night. We know that that basically it's if the deal goes bad, we still got an out. And so basically, yeah, the borrower made a few payments, and then they lost a job, and we did a little bit of a forbearance, and then they missed some more payments, and then they actually moved out of the house, and we talked to them and said, hey, what would you like to do? And we ended up doing a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So basically, it's wouldn't affect their credit, because we wanted to work with them, and we didn't want to go through a foreclosure, and that just takes more time, and so then we got the house back.
So Larry, let's talk about that just a second. So they were like, guy, Larry, we can't make this. So I'll tell you what, we'll just give you the house back. So you didn't have to go through foreclosure, which was good for them. It was great for you. And, as they were kind of leaving, they suggested a couple of people that may want to buy it, but they were ready to move. And so you guys ended up getting the house back. Kind of right in the middle of the beginning of the pandemic, right? Which was like May of last year.
Yeah. So, yeah. And, so basically, as with anything, as far as when you get a kind of unexpected surprise, you go, what do we do? And we roll up our sleeves and we get to work. And I advertised this on Facebook Marketplace as the first place I advertised. And I figured, okay, I can always advertise at other places if I need to, but I didn't get a realtor. We didn't get an agent of any sort. We put a lockbox in the house, and I started advertising on Facebook, and had a website set up for it so I could redirect people to that had a lot of pictures. And gosh, seriously, within about 3 days, we had 800 replies to the ad.
And Larry, let's talk about your ad here. And these folks have heard us. It's heard us over the past few weeks talking about a penalty box buyer. But basically, what you did here, right, is you used the ad that we always talk about. And we had Scott Bauer on last week. He uses the same type ad: private financing available to deserving buyers with a large down payment.
Right. And
you place that ad on Facebook Marketplace. Tell me what happened when you placed that ad.
Yeah. So when I placed that ad, we get a lot of calls, and one of the first questions people ask if they're not completely qualified, they say, well, how much do they need to put down? And so we kind of qualify them and say, well, how much have you got? And before we really start talking terms, one thing, if you start talking details and terms too early, then it kind of puts you into a bind as far as what you actually could end up doing with the house and so on. So I think people sometimes get too involved as far as, we got a buyer, and I need to really start talking what the details are in terms first before you really do some qualification there.
So Larry, how many people did you have kind of inquire into this thing?
Yeah, anytime we put a house on Facebook, if we price it right, we get at least 50 people that we end up talking to.
Right. But you had 800 people look at it, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, 800 people looked at the ad, and again, if you've got good information, like I say, I've got a little website that I can direct people to, and if they can go look at the pictures and say if this is the deal for them or not, and of course, the house did need some work, and so I didn't want to get somebody in there that didn't know how to fix it or didn't have the capability to fix it. Especially if we're carrying the note.
Right. and
So I ended up talking to 50 people, not just talking to them, but chatting with them back and forth in emails and so on. And we ended up talking to about 3 or 4 people that were really serious and really could do what we needed to do as far as, a little work on the house and so forth. And yeah, it took us about less than a week to really get the house under contract and get a deal to go forward.
So you had 800 people up here, kind of in the top of the funnel. Then you took it down to about 50 that you thought, well, and then you had it down to 3. And then once you got it down to that 3, you kind of went through, you talked to them about what it is. You had them go to an RMLO, a residential mortgage loan originator, because you wanted to make sure that the loan was Safe Act compliant, and you did everything right. And so you get it, and you find the buyer, and I think you told me you closed it from start to finish in less than 3 weeks.
Right. And you know, with anything too, it's a matter of just talking to people and say, you know, what experience do you have? Really find, well, for that matter, find their pain. You know, a lot of times if we think about it, when we go to buy a house, the seller has a problem, you know, but you also, if you're on the seller side and you're selling a house, the buyer has a problem. They're looking for something that they could either move into or something.
And tell us a little bit about, you know, this is a feel-good story, guys. So tell us just a little bit about the buyers that you ended up getting this house and kind of what that story was.
Well, to be clear, Morenci is a little town, and the woman ended up buying it, lived just a few blocks from the house, and she'd been kind of watching it and so on, and it had been vacant for a while. Well, when we ended up talking to her, she wanted to buy the house for her disabled dad, and you know, great little story is that her dad had been living in not very good conditions, and so she said, "Hey, I want to buy this house and rehab it for my dad," and you know, so that's what she did. It's kind of a nice little story too. After we got the deal, basically the ink wasn't even dry yet. She started painting the house, and she sent us a picture of the house that she'd painted it and so on. So you know, it makes you feel good that they're ready to jump in there and you know, get going on it. And then they put a ramp on the house as well too for her dad, and you know, it just feels really good, you know. And you know, something like this, it's not, you know, it's not always about getting a home run. This deal really was a base hit, and you know, but
Larry, you guys do deals like this every week, every month, and it just makes total sense as you go through this. And you found a great buyer, and they've completely remodeled this house, right?
yeah, and I mean, we're still staying in touch with them, and they're, you know, and of course now we're into several months as far as payments go, and they're paying well, and it feels good, you know, don't have to worry about it.
Hey, Joe.
Yeah. Hey,
I want to make sure before we go down the trail too far here that we go back and just kind of chronically lay out what happened.
yes, let's do that.
Larry bought a note where he was receiving monthly payments. He was just the bank. Right? He paid $20,000 for the note. The property was worth $38,000, but his investment in the note that was paying every month, he only paid $20,000 for the note. So you bought the note at a safe, what we would say, Larry, is an investment to value ratio. Right. Your investment in the note compared to the value of the property was low. And you can show your slides and we can go through these, but I wanted to just chronicle and then something kind of crazy happened, right? The guy that was originally paying on the note defaulted, right? And he'd been paying for a long time, so it was sort of odd that he did it, but it happened, right? Because people always say, what happens if somebody doesn't pay, right? And let's go back to your screen and we'll show that, and we'll just kind of chronicle. So you bought this note for $20,000. Then you had to go through a forfeiture process to repossess the property, right, Larry?
Yes, sir. Yes.
And then am I correct in saying that the guy actually just deeded it to you?
Exactly. Yeah.
So the guy that was paying defaulted. Instead of you having to go through the whole foreclosure, you had what I would say is the right conversation with him. Right? And that right conversation was, look, this isn't working for either one of us. It's going to be better. And so he said, okay, I'll just deed it back to you. Now, all of a sudden, you own the property again. And when you own the property again, then you went out and put it on Facebook Marketplace, which that's the coolest story in the world. I mean, you live in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, right?
Yeah.
You market a property in Michigan, and in 48 hours, you find the right guy that ends up buying it, pays you $6,000 down. And then you're receiving mailbox money again.
Yes, sir.
Now, because I taught you how to do this, do you share in that income with me?
Hey, Larry, just tell him the check's in the mail.
Check's in the mail. Yeah. And then, you know, I mean, the beauty of being the bank is that, yeah, occasionally things go bad, but, you know, if you botch your note right, you do really have an out, and you have an exit strategy. And you know, we could have done a number of things with this house, but you know, we decided that this was probably the best way to go on this house. And And it didn't need a whole lot of work. It needed some work, but doing the qualification as far as the person that was moving in there, I felt confident that they could do it.
And Larry, but you learned how to do it the right way, right? I mean, you learned that, you buy a note that is paying. You bought the note at the right price. You learned how to buy a note, right? And then once you did that and you collected payments, and then you learned that, sometimes borrowers, things happen, bad things happen to good people every day. So they couldn't pay. You and your servicer were in communication with the borrowers, and they said, you know what, we've just got to kind of move on to, start our lives over. So, we'll just give you the house back. You go through the forfeiture process, you get the house back, and you guys immediately knew what to do with it, right? You immediately knew that, hey, we're in Coeur d'Alene. We bought the note and never went to Michigan, right? Small town in Michigan. You then ended up with owning the property. Again, never went to small town Michigan. And then you find a great buyer and a great story here. And that's what it's all about. It's about learning the process and following that process.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And not to say that we always have the answer right away, but that's why we surround ourselves by smart people like you and Mr. Speed. It's sometimes we just need to get the right answer, and sometimes people give us a different look at as far as what can be done, and
well, let's talk about kind of what you ended up doing here. So you ended up selling it, right, to these folks in these penalty box buyers in Michigan. And so they gave you $6,000 down, and then you had $5,436 in payments the first year. So the first year you bought in $11,000, and then you bring in another $5,436 for another 8 years. So at the end of the day, your 9-year income on that $20,000 investment was, almost $55,000. You still, I'll bet this payment was a lot more than the payment you did when you bought the note at $453 a month, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that I was thinking about in looking at this, because I know people ask, Larry, you're a pretty advanced student. You and Mariska both. You're advanced students. You're award-winning students with NoteSchool. And so we have people that start in NoteSchool and they're worried to death. Well, I can't do all that Larry and Mariska know how to do, right? There's a number of strategies that somebody could have done, Larry, could have done in this process had they not had the horsepower to do all that you did, right? Now, I say that you got the juice out of the lemon here, right? You had a $20,000 investment. You said instead of selling the house for cash to a local investor, and you certainly could have sold it for more than your investment, you said, I'm just going to go retail this thing and sell it back out and be the bank again. So you didn't have to make that decision, but you could make that decision. And I looked at it and I said, my gosh, he had $20,000 invested in the first year. After you resold it, you had already collected back $11,000.
Yep.
So for a $9,000 remaining investment, you have 8 years worth of $5,500 a year.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know what the yield is on that, Larry, but I can calculate that. Let me just say it's high.
It's very high, right? And Larry, you guys did receive some payments on this prior to you getting the property back as well. So, it is, again, it's just following the process. And that's what we're all about. Larry, you're muted. There you go.
If we wanted to, we could actually sell the note at this point or partial out. We've got to still have more options as well too. We're gonna probably hang on to it. We're gonna hang on to it because she's probably gonna end up paying it off early.
So Larry, let me say this. 40 years of doing this business and 20 years of teaching, it has been my heart's desire for somebody to get one thing really well. And that is that they're a deal architect. They don't just do things one way. They know how to look at a deal and figure out the moving parts of that deal and figuring out the puzzle pieces to configure it. And for a small deal, you made a lot of money because you were a deal architect.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Well, and it's not something I learned overnight, or we learned overnight. We've been working at it for years, and you know, it's fun too. You know, it's when you can help people either stay in their homes or get into a home. It just makes you feel really good too.
Well, you know, both ways. Sometimes you help people out of a house that can be another stressful factor, right? It's like, okay, now we've gotten rid of this, we can move on with our lives, we can move somewhere else and get started fresh, and that's a great feeling as well.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Larry, we'll hang on. If you can hang on a little bit, we'll have a little after party. We're gonna let these guys finish up. You are awesome, and let me tell you something. I remember a long time ago that I spoke at your local RIA in the Seattle area,
Mm-hmm.
and you and Mariska, your wife, came and picked me up and took me to dinner. And I don't know how long ago that's been now, 7 or 8 years ago, but I still remember that. I still remember how hospitable you guys were. And it is just awesome to see all the cool things you've done. And your creativity is contagious. Let me just say that.
Well, thank you. I've got some funny stories I could tell about Eddie too, but this is probably not the appropriate time.
Yeah, we won't share all those on NoteSchool TV today. I'm just saying. We've had a fun time together.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll see you in the after party.
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks so much, Larry. Thanks so much, Eddie. Brian, why don't you go ahead and talk about our sponsor and, well, you know, Feeding Frenzy Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. And before I do that, let me kind of bring this full circle, right? So we started talking about how you can sell something across the country within 48 hours. And what's really great about this example is not only did he start in the note business, he got himself into a deal that went bad, so to speak. Being the bank, you are always able to kind of turn it around and benefit from it. But he was able to help somebody who in this market really needs an opportunity, needs a second chance. And kind of like Joe said in the news, listings are down. The opportunity to buy a house is down. On top of that, like we've talked about in the past, the number of penalty box buyers out there is growing and growing and growing. And so this, I think this student story is such a beautiful picture of really what's happening in the marketplace. And so it's really cool to see kind of how it all unfolded. And we'll talk about some more details in the and some of these questions in the after party. But yes, let's talk about our sponsor. NoteSchool TV is sponsored by NoteSchool and the Feeding Frenzy Friday. So Notes Direct every single month is pushing out more and more assets. And the Feeding Frenzy Friday is simply a playlist that each week we break down a note off of Notes Direct to kind of give you more intel and more of a different look on how to approach a certain note that you can buy off of Notes Direct, as easy as you would buy something on Amazon.com, right, or off of a website. And this week it's really unique because we're going to approach an REO property and what that looks like to go and buy a note or to buy an asset that's actually the house and not the paper. So it's a really interesting one to check out. Make sure you're checking that out. You can always go to notesdirect.com to learn a little bit more, as well as acquire assets yourself. If these videos are, again, of content, or if the content is valuable to you, rather, make sure you're liking and subscribing the videos. If you're trying to figure out how can I get engaged, how can I ask some questions, turn the bell notification on so that you're getting notified each time we go live. We're going to stick around and have an after party after this, where we're going to address some of the comments and some of the questions that came in during this show. Got a lot of people to give shout outs to. If you're brand new and you're just trying to figure out what's kind of next, man, as always, go to noteschool.com/TV to learn a little bit more about NoteSchool, to learn about notes, and even to get engaged with us and kind of figure out what that next step for you is going to be. I've had a great time. We'll be here every single Wednesday. Stick around. If you have the time, stick around. We're going to have an after party after we close this thing out, and we'll kind of get some of these questions. If you can't stick around, we'll see you on the other side next week. All right. So we are back in the after party. And first thing I want to do is give a shout out to some of the people like Chris, who has been a long time listener, but a first time attender, he says, right? So I love that. And I'm glad you guys are engaging with us and stuff like that. One of the things I wanted to start with was a question from Glamour Property, who asked about Larry. She wants to know, for the buyers that came in, did you use an RMLO, a residential mortgage lending officer?
That's a great question. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely we did, because if we're going to make the loan Dodd-Frank compliant, we need to do that. So yeah. Yes, we did that. Great question.
Yeah, we always
and not only that, I wanted to say that, you know, I've been buying seller financing for 40 years, right? And what I've learned is that the real estate investors that used to just vet their buyers themselves, now they have a discipline of using the residential mortgage loan originator, and they'll call it a little bit different things in different states, but that's generally what the acronym means. Yeah. They vet the buyers better. A third party who's doing the underwriting process, that's underwriting the loan, Larry, to your specifications, making sure it's legal, but you still get the yes or no whether I'm okay with the guy. And all of a sudden, it's kind of a done-for-you business that makes your bank better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other piece of that too is almost the outsourcing, right? You don't want to get in the business of collecting W-2s and pay stubs and bank statements and trying to make the decision yourself. Let someone else handle that, right? Alan asked, what do you pay an RMLO? And the reality is kind of twofold. It's typically a few $100s in my case. But the bigger thing is, in a lot of the cases, you're going to be asking your buyer to pay this as a part of this process. This is something they're more than happy to do, simply because you're providing a service, the financing, and you're offering something that really no one else is willing to. And so these little fees that add up to you, the buyers, a lot of the time, as long as they can afford it, are more than happy to do it.
Well, and Brian, you know, the other part of that is, again, you said that correctly, in that you're going to have the buyer, that's part of the buyer's cost, but they don't have all of these other crazy fees that you do when you go to the big banks, right? You don't have, you know, all these loan origination fees and all these different things. So it's a smoother process. Yeah.
Yeah, smoother process. Closing costs are going to be less. You don't see this run up of points being paid to a lender that you can't figure out what you're paying the fee for, kind of thing. And again, to Glamour Properties comment, the vetted buyer pays the RMLO if approved for the purchase. That's right. Our goal is to have them go ahead and do that. Let's see.
I just might want to add too, is basically, you know, my wife used to be a mortgage loan officer, so we kind of do some pre-qualification beforehand, you know, because we don't want to promise anybody something and then there's not a chance in heck that they could actually qualify. So we do that as well too, because you know, you just don't want to take anybody down that little rabbit hole.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, I think, how you kind of get the funnel, right? You start at 800 people. You're not going to call 800 people. And even out of the 50, you're not going to say, go talk to an RMLO if you don't have a down payment, if you can't afford $1,000 a month or whatever the payment is. You're kind of using some common sense rule to set expectations, manage expectations, and then say, these are really the 3 qualified people that would be worth learning a little bit more about.
You know, Larry, one thing I wanted to talk about, because you're deep in note school, and we discuss this behind the scenes in our labs all the time, right? But most people that are here aren't necessarily in these labs, and they don't hear this conversation. The reason that we suggest you run the ad that you ran, and you had more wording in there than I might have put in the ad, but it worked, right? You can't argue with success, right? Is private financing says something different than seller financing. A lot of times to the consumer, seller financing or owner financing means no qualifying. while you did private financing, you alluded there was a lender and a process. But you also said something that was said, just because you've been turned down for a traditional mortgage doesn't mean you're bad. Private financing for deserving buyers. And you also did not specify the down payment, but you didn't allude it was you didn't allude you were going to get into it for nothing. And you said private financing for deserving buyers with large down, right? So there was that few words says a lot about the smart advertising that brings you the customer you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And Michael in Atlanta made a comment saying, is it really difficult to apply these concepts to the commercial space, to commercial property? And the reality is, no, it's not more difficult. It's really the exact same concept. In fact, I would say that traditionally, the commercial projects, that when you look at small businesses and commercial, seller financing is a much bigger player in that space for a long time, just because of the price point. People don't qualify for, say, millions of dollars, right?
Well, remember this. Seller financing fills the gap conventional lending doesn't fill.
Correct.
Okay. While there is a shortage of real estate, there also right now is a shortage of financing on residential property. Essentially 35% of the people that could get a mortgage last January can't get one this January. Now, people say, well, that can't be true because their property is escalating in value. Yeah, when you have a shortage of inventory, the best buyers can still get a loan. But you still have this big pool of people over there that are really what we believe are good buyers that have now been eliminated from conventional financing. And Larry, Mariska was a loan originator. You're very sophisticated, in the space. What would happen if you would have sold this property and he would have trying to get a conventional mortgage for $32,000? What would he have found out?
Wouldn't have found anybody willing to do that. Yeah.
Nobody would make the loan.
Yeah.
Dodd-Frank requires that they limit the fees to the point that a mortgage originator doesn't make $32,000 loans anymore. So you filled a gap in the market that nobody else could fill, which was hoorah for you. You created a home buyer, not a renter. Now let's talk about commercial. Okay. While residential is on fire and doing crazy good, right, guys? Mm-hmm. What is not doing so good right now are segments of commercial real estate. So what do you think happens to lending, Brian, when we start seeing a contraction in the market?
Yep, goes down.
You see a contraction in lending. Yeah. So what happens is then seller financing fills the gap, not just on resi property, but on commercial properties of all kinds. So great question. And let me just tell you that we're going to be talking a lot about commercial as it relates to creative financing structures along the way, because the market's just going to demand it.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we're kind of wrapping things up here, I wanted to mention Peggy's comment. She's basically asking about the boots on the ground. How are you able to do this from this farther distance, right? And so talk to us a little bit about your boots on the ground, so to speak, which is really going to be, I'm guessing, your note servicer who's going to help facilitate a lot of this.
Actually, after we decided that this was not going to be going into getting payments back in, we actually took over the servicing and we. Because basically they weren't making payments. So it's really actually pretty easy to find boots on the ground. It's like you can either go on to, in this particular instance, I believe we actually just found somebody through the borrower that said, hey, I can get somebody to put the lockbox on there. And we had a couple contractors that would actually, excuse me, because we do other properties as well too. We actually had a lockbox on there already because we had the property preservation company would go out and do that. So then it was just basically kind of a trust sort of thing. Also, it's kind of cool because we found out that a police officer lived next door. So, the house didn't have any problems with vandalism or anything like that. So,
Brian, let me just make a comment there in general for the audience. One of the things that we have found that is an educational gap is that people don't understand that there are all kind of services and vendors, unlike there were 25 years ago. Right. There's all kind of service and vendors that can be our boots on the ground that don't have to physically be our boots. And so we bought assets in 35 states over the last many years, and we've never physically been to those properties. And people that are used to buying just in their backyard and think they always have to have the key in their physical hands to own a property or to own a rental or whatever, or sell a property. I think we teach people different ways to do it. And so it doesn't shock us at all that Larry did sold this property way across the country. Larry really just implemented an executable plan. And of course, he implemented it to perfection, but he just implemented it. There was nothing that came up in this process that I think was a shock to you, right, Larry? It was just the normal thing that you sort of knew was available.
Well, thank you for that, Eddie. Yeah, and it's some of it's through trial and error when we've been through this before and what works and what doesn't and so on. And so, yeah, I guess I thank you for your compliment for that we implemented to perfection.
Well, I love that. Well, that kind of wraps up our after party. Larry, thank you so much for joining us and sharing today. Eddie and Joe, as always, it's great to see you. For all of those who joined us, I really appreciate you jumping on, asking your questions, engaging with us. It means a lot. Hopefully you got a lot of value out of it. We'll plan on seeing you next week on NoteSchool TV. We'll see you on the other side.